Welcome to the ScreenCrush Break Room. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in Loki, Episode 5.
The title of this episode is Journey into Mystery. This is referencing the comic book where Thor made his first appearance. But also, Sylvie and Loki, by the end of this episode, are taking a journey into mystery themselves, entering the realm of the head of the TVA. The episode starts with the camera upside down and rotating into the Timekeepers' chamber. Now, this symbolizes that the perception of the characters are being inverted. The Timekeepers are no longer on top, Loki's world is turned upside down as he realizes he loves Sylvie, and the world where they wind up is kind of like the Upside Down, a place that's the dark shadow of the real world where all the unwanted things are sent. Someone on Twitter, and I'm having a hard time finding the tweet, pointed out that this symbol that we think is an hourglass or an infinity symbol could also be a Dagaz. This is a Norse rune that represents the end of a path and an awakening. It also shows the balance between negative and positive energy and between light and darkness. And this is Loki's entire arc in Norse mythology, in the movies, and in this series. Loki is a character who is defined by loops, death and rebirth, like Ragnarok. The monster of this episode is called Elioth. In the comics, he's exactly this, a big purple void that transcends all space and time. He was accidentally freed by Ravonna Renslayer, who then had to ask the Avengers for help defeating him. However, he ended up being used as a pawn by Kang the Conqueror. Not the first hint about Kang in this episode. Ravonna genuinely wants to find out who created the TVA. I've mentioned this before, but in the comics, she's a princess from the 43rd century who's in love with Kang. Maybe in the show, she was a princess and the TVA took her as a variant, and the series is actually going to end with her meeting Kang. The series has done a lot to mirror Thor's character growth from Thor Ragnarok. Both characters were transported to a new world, forced to change their appearance, and were kidnapped by a dictatorship. And now, Loki ends up on a trash heap planet, just like Thor did, and has to venture into a large, angry void, just like Thor. And Kid Loki is a badass. Turns out he killed Thor in his timeline. Now, I've mentioned this before, but this show is likely setting up Kid Loki as a member of the Young Avengers. Almost every member of this team has appeared in the MCU or is scheduled to appear very soon. The episode is filled with background Easter eggs that I spotted and that some of you spotted on Twitter, and thanks all of you for that. One of the most obvious was this bright yellow Thanos Helicopter, like he flew in the comic book Spidey Super Stories number 39. In fact, Thanos' helicopter blade sword in Endgame was an homage to this appearance. There's a spaceship, or maybe a UFO here, maybe from a reality where aliens did land on Earth in the 1950s in a flying saucer. I know I've seen one just like this before in the comics being flown by your mom. In the foreground here, you can see a giant yellow jacket helmet from the first Ant-Man movie. This is likely from an alternate reality where he chose to grow instead of shrink. But maybe at the end of Ant-Man, when Scott Schrank crossed down, he entered the quantum realm. And from there, maybe he could have wandered around for a long time until he grew himself so far that he ended up here. Now, we already know that the quantum realm facilitates time travel, so it could be that Cross got here on his own, maybe after figuring out how to grow himself. Thanks to David Gallagher for pointing the helmet out to me. When the camera goes underground, we see a frog version of Thor. That's right, the mighty Throg from the comics. His jar is labeled T365 and Thor 365 featured Throg. Now notice how he's trying to jump up and reach Mjolnir. This is also a callback to the first Avengers movie when he's falling through the air in Hulk's room. And the others mock Loki, saying,
"You leave your glorious purpose there."
And of course, this has been one of Loki's catchphrases since the first Avengers.
I am Loki of Asgard, and I am burdened with glorious purpose.
That also keeps getting repeated throughout the series. Back at the TVA, Ravonna refers to the real head of the TVA as
find the man behind the curtain and kill him.
A reference to the Wizard of Oz. This show's always had strong parallels to the Wizard of Oz. Sylvie and Dorothy are both young girls taken at a young age who are just trying to get home. Also, all of the supporting characters in the Wizard of Oz come to realize that they actually had what they needed all along. And in this case, it seems like Loki had power inside of him he never knew about.
I think we're stronger than we realize!
The episode features Richard E. Grant as Classic Loki, wearing a costume that's an exact copy of his look in the comics. But unlike his comic counterpart, he's come to realize the errors of his ways and just wants companionship. He's feeding Alligator Loki boxed Roxy wine. I'm thinking this is a variant version of Roxxon, the evil corporation that owns the Roxcart store that we saw in episode 2. Meanwhile, Kid Loki is drinking an old school Ecto-1 High C cooler.
Why do you have an original Ecto Cooler juice box from 1989?
Sir Arthur Indeed on Twitter says that the music playing in the bowling alley is the Mike Flowers pop cover of Wonderwall, in a way, a variant of a popular song.
We're broken. Every version of us forever.
Now that we've seen Richard E. Grant as future Loki, it confirms something I've been saying for a long time about the Asgardian god of mischief. His hair is starting to thin, and he will go bald. Someone should tell him that the best way to prevent hair loss is to start when you still have hair left. That's why I use Keeps, the sponsor of this video. There's a history of hair loss in my family, so when my hair started to thin, I didn't waste any time. So believe me, if your hair's starting to thin, don't put it off. Start using Keeps now. Treatments can take up to 4 to 6 months or more to see results, so it's important to act fast, and you'll need to start early and stick with it. The sooner you start using Keeps, the more hair you'll save. It's even proven to work on Asgardian scalps. Keeps has more 5-star reviews than any of its competitors, and hundreds of thousands of men trust Keeps for their hair loss prevention medication. So if you're noticing that you're losing your hair, you can do something about it. For a limited time, go to keeps.com/ScreenCrush or click the link in the description to receive 50% off your first order. Back to the Easter eggs.
The Loki with his own homemade Mjolnir is Boastful Loki, and he gives us several MCU name drops.
After I vanquished Captain America and Iron Man, I claim my prize. All 6 Infinity Stones.
I notice this bowling alley has stairs leading downwards, making me think it's from an alternate timeline where people bowl downhill. The game in the background here is called Polybius. This is an urban myth about a video game created by the Pentagon to mind control people. And we're going to see this throughout the episode. There's lots of other urban myths that appear in the background explaining their disappearances, kind of like how D.B. Cooper turned out to be Loki.
I can't believe you were D.B. Cooper!
In the opening, we see that Oak Island is on the timeline as a variant. Now this is a way too cool and long of a mystery for me to recap in a video, but basically there's an island in Nova Scotia, Canada, where people have been trying to find a hidden pirate chamber underground for 200 years. Look it up, read about it, it's a wild story. As we've seen before, anything involving the Infinity Stones gets the TVA's attention immediately. As the Ancient One explained, moving around an Infinity Stone causes way more damage to the timeline.
In this new branch reality, without our chief weapon against the forces of darkness, our world would be overrun.
MK Songboard on Twitter also pointed out that this board had a reference to Wrightsville as a Nexus event, and the theater marquee here is from Wrightsville. Then he's greeted by a Loki wearing a Vote Loki badge from the excellent Vote Loki comic book 5 years ago. In the comic, Loki was nearly elected president by promising to lie to everyone, but the entire campaign turned out to be a lie to simply help out one character. And Crackhead Zhang points out that this guy is a Loki variant that we saw hinted at in episode 2. There are also matching shots of Loki and Sylvie looking up at their new predicament, as one of the many ways the show uses visuals to link these two characters together and show us that they have a special bond. God of Biscuits on Twitter pointed out that the two bridges are the Golden Gate and the Bay Bridge, but they're mashed together like they were built to be part of the same bridge. Then Sylvie sees a pyramid and a sphinx, another possible hint to an appearance of Kang. In the comics, Kang is from the future and decides to roll around in the past for fun. He invents the identity of Rama Tut and uses a time machine disguised as a sphinx to go back in time and rule ancient Egypt. And there's another Kang hint here, with Avengers Tower being renamed Kang Tower. In the comics, Tony Stark sells Avengers Tower to the King Corporation, which turns out to be a corporate front for the villain Kang. Thanks Zephyr44 for that one. We also see Stonehenge, a place where Eric Selvig tried to place his instruments to read the convergence. Now it could be that Stonehenge is a kind of temporal reality nexus, a possible gateway to planets like this one. Or maybe they just built it wrong in this reality and Stonehenge had to be purged. Back at the bowling alley, we see a game called Space Mission, which was only a board game and never a video game in reality. War breaks out between the Lokis, and we see why none of these guys have ever made it off the planet.
I betrayed you, and now I'm king.
About that.
You can't be serious.
Come on. What did you expect?
And I thought this was the key line of the episode.
And whenever one of us dares try to fix themselves, they're sent here to die.
Now, I've talked about this before, about how Lokis are trapped in a loop of redemption and failure, and this could explain why. Loki has improved himself before, but the TVA always steps in to erase his gains until Thanos permanently erases him. Carol X Loki on Twitter pointed out that Kid Loki and Alligator Loki do get help.
Get help! Help him!
Also, President Loki gets his hand cut off, meaning that he probably came from Phase 2, where every film featured someone losing a limb as an ode to The Empire Strikes Back. Outside, we see the USS Eldridge, the subject of another urban myth, the Philadelphia experiment. This myth says the Navy brought the ship into dry dock to equip it with a new technology to make it invisible to radar, but then it disappeared, and now we know where it went. According to Silent Hamish on Twitter, the tank in the episode was a Chrysler TV-8, a nuclear-powered tank designed by Chrysler in the 1950s that was never put into production, because it's a terrible idea. One shell hits a nuclear-powered tank and explosion. But maybe it was in some alternate reality. Johnny Pappas on Twitter pointed out that this license plate reads GRNW1D, a reference to Mark Gruenwald, longtime Marvel writer and editor, and the basis for Mobius in the comics. Mobius doesn't remember the alligator.
A lot of Lokis, but no, I don't remember an alligator.
Which supports the theory that Mobius is not the only Mobius. In the comics, there are several of these guys, and they're all clones. And in episode 2, Ravonna says that he left all the rings on the coffee table, but he doesn't remember doing so.
Those rings are already there.
And they're all from you.
So it would not surprise me if at some point in the show we still get to see multiple Owen Wilsons popping up at the same time. You know, I think the Loki of this show has actually undergone even greater changes than the main timeline Loki. I'm not so sure that the main timeline Loki wouldn't have eventually tried to rule again, but this guy knows his place in the universe and knows that ruling just won't make him happy.
There might be a timeline for you to rule.
And then I'd finally be happy.
The two of them walk by a Kree warship, perhaps the Dark Aster, right here. Now this could very easily be from an alternate reality where Carol Danvers wasn't able to stop the Kree from destroying the Earth, or where Ronan destroyed Xandar. This shield helicarrier has the Hydra logo on it from a timeline where Hydra succeeded in launching Project Insight. And Santos 2 Isaiahs pointed out that this is the Red Skull's rocket ship from Captain America, the First Avenger. And here is a very cool Easter egg. This is a statue of the head of the Living Tribunal. In the comics, he's the end-all be-all judge of existence, and he's been mentioned in the MCU before.
This is the staff of the Living Tribunal.
Kid Loki gives our Loki a flaming dagger. Now this could be Leviathan, a sword that Loki forged to slay a rooster in Norse mythology. Norse mythology is even weirder than Marvel Comics. When old Loki sacrifices himself, he builds a replica of Asgard. And this made me wonder if when he was on that planet all by himself, if this is what he did to keep himself company. Maybe not building the whole city at once, but he could have just created everything around him, and it would have spawned new areas as he moved around, sort of creating a bubble around him where he would always be king. And this, of course, would be symbolic of Loki's desire to rule, where he would have an entire kingdom, but no one to share it with. Andrew Eisman on Twitter points out that the Void versus Classic Loki is taken directly from the Siege comic books. When Sylvie mentions Loki helping to enchant others, he says, "I don't know how!" But we've actually seen him do this before, to Valkyrie in Ragnarok.
Must be a very painful memory.
Now maybe he just doesn't know he has this ability yet because that movie takes place further in his possible future. And of course the episode has a fairy tale cliffhanger with the young prince and his lady love looking at the tower of the evil wizard who's controlling everything. Now this palace exists at the end of time, which is where the Timekeepers come from in the comics. In the books, the last surviving member of the TVA creates the Timekeepers to go back and establish the TVA. If that's the case, then maybe the person in here could be Mobius from the future. Let's say he goes back to tear down the TVA, gets mind wiped again, and ends up staying on to create the TVA. Now this is interesting. Ike Lorenzo on Twitter pointed out that Trapper 15's cell and Loki's cell from Thor the Dark World have very similar energy. This could mean that whoever is behind the TVA knows Norse technology. It could in fact be a variant Loki. Of course, I still like the theory that it's actually Miss Minutes. It could also be Kang, or maybe an older version of Kang from the comics, Immortus, maybe being played by Morgan Freeman. But let me know your Big Boss theories down in the comments or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.